Hello and welcome back. In this section, we're going to be dodging and burning using luminosity blending. Now, this is a super cool experience because dodging and burning is all about affecting highlights and shadows. So you can actually paint highlights or paint shadows on an image. This can be an image as a whole, it can be on your subject, any part of an image. Now, in this case, we're going to be working on a portrait, which is a really great place to dodge and burn, but it can also be kind of tricky. Because the whole idea behind dodging and burning is making some areas lighter and some areas darker. And if you're not careful, you can actually change the way a person's face looks. And we'll show you kind of what that looks like in just a second. However, using luminosity blending with dodging and burning kind of safeguards you from doing anything that might make your subject look worse. So it's not only an easier way to dodge and burn, but in my opinion, it's a little bit more accurate. So when you're dodging and burning, this is my preferred technique. And if you want to learn more about dodging and burning, we have an entire pro tutorial called How to Master Dodging and Burning in Photoshop. So I recommend checking that out. In the meantime, let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. So here in Photoshop, we're going to go to Sample Images. We're in Chapter 3, Section 2, Dodge and Burn. And let's go ahead and open this image up and hit F for full screen. Now, to start off with a simple dodge and burn, we're going to grab a curves adjustment layer and we're going to make this a little bit brighter. Okay, and this is going to be like the dodge layer. Okay, let's just invert our layer mask. We'll go ahead and make it black. And then let's grab another curves adjustment layer. We're going to make this a little bit darker. This will be the burn layer. And we're going to invert the layer mask. So let's say, your typical dodging and burning, basically I'm just painting white on my layer mask. We're going to make some areas a little bit lighter. Okay, there we are, looking pretty good. And then I'll go to my burn layer and we'll make some areas just a little bit darker. And this is, by the way, I'm just showing you the example of like a non-luminosity blending dodge and burn. Okay, so made some areas lighter and made some areas darker. Now let's go ahead and zoom out and take a look at how that actually affected this image. If I turn these off and back on, you can see because I made these areas a little bit lighter, you can see there, and I made the top of her cheeks a little bit darker, what this actually did is changed our subject's face. It took her cheekbones, and if you make something darker, by the way, it makes it look like it's further back, and if you make something lighter, it makes it look like it's further forward. So what I did here is, I did this on purpose, but I basically took her cheeks and pushed them back a little bit, making them darker, and then I took her jawline and made it lighter, which pushed it forward a little bit. So doing this, and you can see it right here, really changed the shape of her face. It made her look like she's got a larger jaw than she actually does. So this is one of the pitfalls, in my opinion, of traditional dodging and burning, because it can be relatively tough to know exactly where to paint your highlights and shadows. Unless you're a professional retoucher, you can actually change a person's face for the negative. But introducing luminosity blending to dodging and burning, it kind of safeguards against that. So let's take a look at doing basically the same idea, but with luminosity blending. So with luminosity blending, okay, let's start off with our dodge layer here. This is making things lighter. So let's just double click on our name here. I'm going to call this Dodge 01. Okay, now this time we're going to start, I'm going to hit Shift Delete on our layer mask. There we go. Fill the contents with black. So we're going to start with just a totally black layer mask. Now, I'm not going to be precise at all where I paint white. I'm just going to take my brush tool and I'm going to paint white just like over top of my entire subject's face. Okay, we'll get over here and get my subject's hair as well. Don't really want to get the background, but there we go. So I just painted white like over my entire subject's face, okay? Now, the whole idea behind luminosity blending is that we can use the light levels, the luminosity of the image itself, to define where this is going to be visible. So let's go ahead and see how to do that. And again, we have the choice between blend if sliders, we can use apply image, or we can use channels. Now we use the blend if sliders on our last image, so let's take a look at apply image. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on our layer mask. Okay, again, I just painted white right over my subject's face. Okay. Now we'll go to image and down to apply image. There we go. And we're going to apply, let's start with our background. So we're going to apply the background on our layer mask. Okay. But notice how this is just a blending mode of normal right now, which just literally creates a snapshot of your image on your layer mask. But I already started with a black layer mask and just painted white over my subject's face. So I only want to darken down the dark areas. Okay. Just darkening is what I want to happen. So that's why we're going to choose a multiply blend mode. There we go. Multiply, and then I want to affect the highlights so we don't check invert, and let's hit OK. So let's go ahead and take a look at the layer mask now. Alt or Option, click on my layer mask, and now you can see instead of just like, before it just looked like this, I just painted white just with my white paintbrush, right? Now it applied that image to my layer mask. So what we have here is my actual subject defining the visibility of this layer. And the darker areas of my subject's face, this is going to be less visible. The lighter areas will be more visible. This is super cool for dodging and burning. So let's go ahead and just kind of do this one more time because I want a little bit more contrast in here. So we'll just go back. We'll go to image, down to apply image again. There we go. And we're just going to do the same settings. So background blending is going to be set to multiply. There we go. Let's hit OK. And let's hold Alt or Option and take a look at our subject now. So you can see just the highlights of my subject's face are going to be visible on this layer, which is my dodge layer. So let's hold Alt or Option. Go ahead and click on that layer mask and then turn this off and on. So you can see we have a much different effect here. The previous effect basically just made this visible everywhere by, just like that, right? All over my whole subject's face. And now we're limited to just the highlights of the subject's face. Okay, so that's a really nice like base level dodge. Now, in my opinion, it's a little bit too bright. So we're just going to take this down just a little bit. Just take my center point down just a little bit there. But here we have a little bit more. Let's just zoom in here so we can see. We have just a little bit more three-dimensionality and a little bit more shape and definition with my subject. So now we can do the same thing with our burn layer. Okay, so the burn layer, let's just start off. I'm going to hit Shift Delete to fill the background with black, or the image rather, the layer mask. Okay, and now let's try the same idea. And I'm going to kind of just generally paint over the dark areas. There we go. So now that we basically painted white all over the subject's face, just making her whole face darker, we'll go on, click on our layer mask, image, down to apply image, okay? And then we basically want to use all the same settings, except we want to make sure we click invert. Remember, the deal is if you want it to be visible where the darks are, click invert. If you want it to be visible where the lights are, don't click invert. So let's click invert here, okay? And you're going to see it's going to be visible just where the darks are. So let's hold Alt or Option, and now you can see it's more, I know it looks super creepy, but the light areas are where the layer is visible, and the dark areas are where the layer is invisible. And in this case, the light areas are actually the darks of the image. So let's do that again. We'll go to Image and down to Apply Image. Okay, same settings, and you're good to go. Now at this point, sometimes when I do apply image, I like to do it like 5 or 6 times. And that can get a little bit annoying to just go to the menu every time. So we're just going to set up a keyboard shortcut. Really easy to do. Just go to Edit and then down to Keyboard Shortcuts. Okay. Go to Image, and then we're just going to scroll down to where we see Apply Image right here. And then you just click here and enter in your own keyboard shortcut. And I'm on a Mac. I use Option Shift Command A. So like literally you just hold down the keys you want and then it'll say good to go. It might say there's a conflict. You can hit accept and go to conflict or undo, choose a different keyboard shortcut. But this one works for me. So I just hit Option Shift Command A and that does apply image. So let's just try that out. So I'm going to just hit, there we go, keyboard shortcut and hit enter because I just want to do this a couple times, make it nice and subtle. There we go. So now let's take a look at the layer mask. Okay, you can see literally this is just visible in those darker areas, which is pretty cool. Now let's hold Alt or Option and click on that layer mask again. But we have another choice here because originally we made this a burn layer, right? Like it's making those areas darker. But I can change this to a dodge layer at any time. Okay, it's really easy to do. Just double click right here, and instead of going darker, I just go lighter. And the cool thing is this just shows up in those shadow areas. So I'm basically making my shadows brighter. So I have the choice. I can make my shadows a little bit brighter, or I can make my shadows a little bit darker. And I can decide how much of my shadows actually get affected. Let's just make them a little bit darker. Okay, now I can do the same thing with my highlights. So for instance, like this highlight over here and this here, it's just a little bit bright in my opinion. It's drawing my eye down a little bit. I don't want that. So let's go ahead and grab a curves adjustment layer. Okay, we're going to pull this down a little bit in brightness. Let's invert my layer mask, and then I'm just going to paint white on my layer mask down here in the bottom. Okay, and we'll come up around here too a little bit. Okay, paint black right there. Smooth that out. Now, I don't want this to be visible in the darks, just the lights. So we just click on our layer mask, keyboard shortcut for apply image now, and then we just don't click on invert and hit OK. And you can see if I hold Alt or Option, this is not going to be visible in my darker areas, just visible in my lighter areas. So what I'm effectively doing is making just my lighter areas a little bit darker, which is really, really fun. Now you can do this, again, you can go any way you want. You can make your lights lighter or darker. You can make your darks darker or lighter as well. So that's some really good general dodge and burn. Now let's get into a little bit more specifics where we highlight certain areas. So I'm going to grab another curves adjustment layer. There we go. We'll just make it a little bit brighter. And we're going to zoom into our image. Let's go ahead and invert our layer mask. Controller Command I. Okay. And now we're just going to paint white on our layer mask. For instance, like on our subject's lip. There we go. On our subject's chin. I'm kind of like following some of the highlights that already exist. There we go. Just using a regular soft edge brush here within a flow of about 50%. Alright, we're just going to put a highlight like right up our subject's, the bridge of our subject's nose there. Alright, we'll just do a little bit in the eye area, a little bit larger brush for larger areas. Smaller brush for smaller areas. Okay, and I'm kind of focusing on, those like kind of the highlights that are actually in the subject's image. Okay, so this is a little bit of like contouring, dodging, and burning. There we go. Now, I still want this to blend into the image a little bit better, right? I still want this to be visible just in the highlights. So we could definitely use apply image here, but we can also use blend if. So let's try blend if. Again, all these techniques can be used in the same image. So let's double click here. Okay, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and tell this to not be visible in the darker areas. You can see it's just starting to disappear from just the darker areas. Okay, and into the light. And you can see this highlight here is a little bit too bright right there. I painted that on, right? But as we do this, it's going to naturally just darken down a little bit. There we go. And give us a more realistic version. So let's hit there's the before and the after. You can see the after just kind of blends in a little bit more naturally with the image as a whole. So we're still able to do some really nice contouring, but it's just disappearing from, there we go, it's disappearing from the darker areas. Let's do the same thing, but now we'll do some darker areas. So let's grab a curves adjustment layer again. Okay, just make it a little bit darker. Controller Command I to invert that. Okay, there we are. Let's go ahead and make this visible right here. You know what, I do want to dodge the eyes just a little bit. I forgot to do that right here. Okay, now we're gonna just do a little bit of burning right around the edge of the eyes. And generally when you're doing this, like, just my advice is to take cues from the image itself. Like where the image is a little bit darker, that's where you can burn a little bit. And where the image is a little bit lighter, that's where you can dodge. And you can do this on your image as a whole, but I generally suggest spending more time where your subjects, where you want the viewer to focus. And that's generally, with a portrait anyway, that's generally going to be like their eyes, right? So I'll spend the most time dodging and burning their eyes. There we go. Make that a little bit larger. Pop the eyebrow a little bit there. A little bit under their chin. Kind of just makes the, that's not a chin, that's a lip. Again, burning pushes an area back, dodging pulls an area forward. And if you don't want an area to go much more forward, you can kind of get the same effect by pushing an area that's nearer back a little bit. And that's what I did under the lip here. See, I made this a little bit darker, pushes it back in space. So in contrast, it makes the lips come forward in space a little bit. Okay, so you can kind of play with that too. There we go. I'm just going to go with the bottom, you know, of the jawline right here. Just make that a little bit darker. And again, by pushing this jawline back a little bit, it makes the face come out a little bit more. Okay? There we go. And that's starting to look pretty good. So let's double click here. And now this time, I really don't want it to be visible over the lighter areas. So we'll hold Alt or Option and click and drag from the right to the left. Okay, so you can see it's just starting to fade out right about there. There we go. So like for the neck, for instance, see there's the before, I painted over some of these highlights, and the after just have a much more natural effect. So it's still there, it's just using the lights and darks of the image itself to decide where it's going to show up. Okay, now looking at this image as a whole, the lights in our subject's neck are a little bit too bright, in my opinion. Okay, so I want to make those a little bit darker. We can do that with dodging and burning as well. Before, we made our lights brighter and our darks darker. But now I'm going to take my lights and I'm going to make those darker. So let's grab another curves adjustment layer. Just pull that down. We can change, you know, this is easy, right? We can change this at any time. Just pull that down, invert our layer mask, and then we'll paint white on our layer mask right around here. Okay, and then we'll do, let's just do a blend if. I'm going to double click and have this not be visible where the underlying layer is darker, just where it's lighter. Okay, so literally I'm just taking my lights and I'm just making my lights a little bit darker. Alright, so that's blend if. I'll just show you, let's just hit undo. You can do the same thing with apply image. So let's go to apply image. We'll go to our background, okay, multiply, and then we're going to not hit invert. See, invert, it affects the darks, not invert affects the lights. So let's hit OK. So pretty similar idea there. So basically I'm just taking the brights in the chin and making them a little bit darker. I'm going to do that one more time. One more time. A little bit darker there. Invert that layer mask. Make it just visible right there. Okay. And then we'll just apply image that also. So you can see that just that area is just going to get a little darker also. So here we have those bright highlights in my subject's neck. Just making them a little bit darker. I think it's a little too dark now, but that's the beauty of curves. You can adjust these at any time. Okay, so by making these a little bit darker, it's just drawing a little bit more attention to my subject's face. Again, it's pushing the neck back a little bit, and it's pulling our subject's head a little bit forward, which means you're just going to kind of focus on her head a little bit more. Okay, let's do a little bit of dodging and burning with her hair. So we'll just grab curves. I love dodging and burning. It's so much fun. It's really easy to do with this because you don't have to be so precise. You don't have to really like be a good painter or be like, oh, the highlight should be right here. I mean, you can do that stuff and it's really fun, but it's nice to be able to just use the light information of your image. There we go. Now let's just double click here, hold Alt or Option, make that not visible in the darker areas. There we go. So just the highlights are coming through as a little bit lighter. Okay. Now, because we haven't done it just yet, let's use channels. So let's go to our channels. I'm going to do this for the eyes. We'll click on RGB first, and then red, green, and blue. I think it'll be nice to bring out some of the... Ooh, you know what? We could also bring out some of these freckles. I love freckles, so let's do this. I'm getting giddy over here over freckles. Let's duplicate our blue channel. Hit Controller Command L for our levels. Okay. I'm going to make my lights a little bit brighter. Okay. And then we're going to make our darks a little bit darker. So what I'm trying to do is enhance the contrast around these freckles. Okay, that looks pretty good. So you can see the freckles, there's the before and the after. Like freckles are more pronounced now. And there are her actual freckles. So let's make this a selection. Controller Command, click there. Now keep in mind that selects the light areas, and I want to select the freckles. So we're going to inverse the selection, right? So we'll go to Select and down to Inverse, selecting the freckles. Okay. And then we're going to grab another Curves Adjustment layer. Okay. Sometimes it does this red thing where it just makes everything red. If it does that, just click, go off your mask and just click right here. Okay. So now, this is what my layer mask looks like. Let's hold Alt or Option. Okay. So light colored here where we have these freckles, dark colored in the skin, right? So it's going to be visible more in the freckles. So we want to take this and just bring this down a little bit, right? To make that visible for the freckles. But now it's visible not just in the freckles, right? Because that's kind of how channels work. It's not just in the freckles, it's kind of everywhere. But not a big deal. All we have to do is group this layer with itself. Remember, this is a really great tip we learned before. Group it with itself. Then put a layer mask on it, and then let's just make that layer mask black. So now, wherever I paint white on the layer mask here, which is, I'm just going to paint over the freckles, right? Wherever I paint white on the layer mask, these freckles are just going to show up a little bit more. Alright, maybe less so down there, but definitely in this area, we want them to show up. Alright, let's hold Alt or Option and click on the layer mask. The other thing that you can do if you want to further enhance this, remember, is you can paint with your brush tool. So let's hit B for the brush tool. Let's go to Overlay, paint dark over the non-freckle areas. Okay, and then paint white over the freckle areas. So you can see I'm enhancing this. Keep in mind, whatever's white is going to be more visible. Whatever's dark is going to be less visible. I just think freckles are a really nice detail, and I like to bring them out when I can. Let's hold Alt or Option and click on the layer mask. So you can see we're able to selectively just bring out those freckles where we want them. So that's the type of dodge and burn also, but we made a really cool selection using our channels first. Let's just change our brush back to normal. Always change your brush back to normal, by the way, because if you don't, you might forget that you put it in overlay, and then you're like, why doesn't my brush work? It's because you put it in overlay. Happened to me a million times. Okay, so there we go. Brighten that up a little bit. Brought up those freckles, made them a little bit more pronounced. And now let's do channels and bring out some of those brights in our subject's eyes. So we'll just go back to our channels. Red, green, and blue. Blue is kind of giving me the most contrast to my subject size. So let's duplicate the blue channel again. Let's hit Controller Command L for our levels. And I really just want to just get those highlights, right? So if I really just want to get those highlights, I gotta change my, there we go. I gotta change my channels until I'm just really dialed into those highlights and hit OK. Oh, and one interesting thing that I'm seeing here too is these are bright areas here, but also look how bright the chin is of my subject. So using the same channels, I can actually affect the chin. I'm going to make the chin darker, and I'm going to make these areas lighter. So here's how you do it. It's easy. Just hold Control or Command and click there. So again, this is just going to select those areas, right? So on a new layer, I'm going to start with the lights, okay? Let's hit Control or Command H, and then I'm just going to paint with white right over these highlights. Okay, let's deselect and see. You can see I just painted with white right there, right? So it's going to be subtle, but you can see I just painted with white. And then I think right over her eyes, I'm going to do that again. So we'll just duplicate this layer. So I'm going to hit Control or Command J. All right, let's change this from normal down to overlay. You can have one or two white layers that are just not even, when you're working with highlights, this is just white. I'm just going to leave it white. This one's set to overlay. Let's just duplicate that again. I'm going to group those, put a black layer mask on that, and then just paint white on my layer mask. This is really just going to bring out all those nice highlights right around my subject's eyes. Okay, so you can see it's just visible right there, right around the eyes. Okay, cool. And in combination with this layer, let's go ahead and group those together. You can see we got a bunch of curves now. Let's just give that a color. Double click and call this eyes. There we go. Let's just turn that off and on. See that so we made that selection with our channels. I'm going to just paint that layer mask that away just a tiny bit there. We made that selection with our channels, and now you can just kind of fill it in. Now remember, back on our channels, this blue copy here, this is where we kind of got those highlights, right? And we were oh, you know what? Our subject's chin is kind of really light here. Okay, so we can still use this blue copy, right? Super easy. Just hold Control or Command and click there again. Makes that into a selection. We'll go back to our layers, and now instead of making it bright, I'm just going to make it darker. So let's go back to curves. Okay, and let's just make it a little bit darker. Cool. Now in this case, I don't necessarily want this to be visible over the eyes because that's just going to cancel out what I just did. So let's hold Alt or Option, click on our layer mask, and then a couple ways to do this. I'm going to go with the non-destructive way because it's my favorite. Let's hit Control or Command G to group this with itself. Alt or Option, click on a layer mask to make a black layer mask, and then just paint white right over top of the chin. Okay, so what this did is just made the highlight of the chin, you can see it there, just made the highlight of the chin just a little bit darker. Okay, so it's a little bit less pronounced. That's all that did there. Pretty cool, huh? So let's just double click and call that chin. So now if we go to channels and I duplicate my blue channel, Control or Command L for our levels, we can see where the highlights are, and you can see the chin is not nearly as bright as it was. It is still a little bit bright, especially on the right side. So let's just do it again. Control or Command, click there, okay? And then we're just going to grab another curves adjustment layer, make that a little bit darker, okay? And then I'll just click right here on this layer mask, and then just paint black on the layer mask, where I don't want this to show up. Just chin. call this chin 2. This is a group of, there we go, just label that orange. Okay, and then of course we can lower the opacity of this if we want to kind of get that little bit half ground there. So you can see we kind of like push that back in space a little bit, and then that brings forward all this sort of thing. So we have all this really nice detail in our subject's eyes. Let's go ahead and group all these together and take a look at our before and after. Here's the before and the after. You can see we've got a really nice effect on our subject. I think I overdid it a little bit. I tend to overdo dodge and burn just a little bit. I'm just going to lower the opacity of the entire group down to like 80% or so. Okay, there we go. That just keeps me from like super overdoing things. Let's do a couple other real quick here. I'm going to put a slight little like halo behind our subject. So let's make it a little bit brighter. Okay, I'm going to use my gradient tool. Let's hit G for the gradient tool. And then we're going to use the radial gradient and then the foreground to transparent. And the foreground color is white. So I'm just going to click here and then drag out like that. Okay, and this is just going to put a little halo right around my subject. But then what I can do, and this is super cool, is I can use her hair luminosity blending to have this layer not be visible where her hair is, and then that will be a nice natural line. So let's just double click on this layer. We're going to hold Alt or Option and have this not be visible where the darks are. Right there. Here's the before and after. So you can see it just disappears from her hair. And then on the layer mask itself, because her hair kind of took care of all the hard part, right? And then I just go on my layer mask and paint black right here. Right, so now she's got a little glow behind her head, and I did, you know, almost no work. The mask pretty much took care of all that for me. She's got a little glow right there, but that's in here somewhere, I think. Yeah, that's in there. So let me just find that real quick. Sometimes you just got to go in and turn some layers off and on. That's right there where we worked on her hair. So just paint black on the layer mask. So this is another, you know, benefit of non-destructive editing is you can just, if you find any errors or things you want to change down the line, it's really easy to do. Okay. There we go. Add a little halo around our subject, and then we're just going to add a tiny bit of dark in the corners also. So let's grab another curves adjustment layer. Darken it down. It's kind of like a artificial vignette. Okay, now we're going to hit G for the gradient tool, and we'll use a linear gradient for foreground to transparent again. So we're just going to go white to transparent. And for this, I'm going to zoom out. We'll just go up. Yeah, there we go. Looks pretty good, and honestly, I don't even think we need to do much luminosity blending. I'm going to darken this down here a little bit more. So let's grab this time I'm going to go to a hue / saturation, and I'm going to lower the saturation. Sometimes if things are saturated towards the edge of the photo, it can just draw your eye to that area. So I want to lower the saturation a little bit, and then I'm going to lower the brightness a little bit too. Invert the layer mask. We've been using curves, but this is kind of like using, I'm darkening it down and using saturation at the same time. And then the same thing here, right? I'll just double click here and I'll say don't be visible in the darker areas, just in the lighter areas. And it makes it look nice and natural there. Okay, cool. So these are like my kind of like finishing steps, just to like, our subject's face is pretty bright here, and I felt like having a little bit of that mirrored in the background would just kind of like make the image as a whole make sense a little bit more, right? And then darkening down here means I'm not going to look down here as much. I'm going to look up here towards my subject. So there we go. So let's go ahead. I'm going to group both of these. Let's take a look at our before and after. Well, here's our before and the after. Very cool. Now you could always go a little bit more subtle with the dodge and burn. I kind of went less subtle with this. You know, kind of going for that style. And everyone's going to have their own style. I do like how we made the freckles a little bit more pronounced. There's the before and the after with that. Super cool. I think it's well done. It's definitely a little bit like stylized, dodge and burn, but I think it's a well done stylization. So I'm into it. And if you wanted it less, all you have to do is just like lower your opacity and you're good to go. Dodging and burning with luminosity blending. I hope you can see here how it made it much easier. Notice I wasn't like necessarily trying to like paint in all the exact right areas. I mean, we did some like around the eyes and things like that, but that was pretty easy. And then we still did luminosity blending to just like blend that right in. So all in all, we did like some pretty cool high level dodging and burning. And I would say the luminosity blending made it much easier because it kind of saves you. And I've been doing this for years, and even now sometimes I'll do something and I'm like, whoa, I made that person look way worse. But using luminosity blending, I think that kind of like takes that part out of it. You're not going to be able to change a person's face shape unless you really want to, and that's a big plus. Now we did that for portrait in this case, but keep in mind you can use these same techniques for an entire image. You know, if you had a photograph of a train, you could make the highlights brighter on the train. You know, so any type of image can benefit from dodging and burning. We just happen to use a portrait here. Alrighty, thank you so much. We'll see you in the next section. Bye, everyone.